series. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight on the live streams. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that each and every one of us are meeting on tonight. Tonight, I come to you from Darkinjung country on the beautiful central coast of New South Wales. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and would also like to acknowledge and pay respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us on the live stream tonight. My name is Michael Farrell. I'm the Advocacy and Engagement Manager at FDCA, and my role tonight is simply to act as host for the discussion and assist in facilitating the conversation between our wonderful subject matter experts. Thanks again to everyone for giving up your precious time to take part in the second episode of FDCA's online engagement series in the pursuit of professional development, improved pedagogical practice, and ultimately better outcomes for children, the children you educate and care for every day. Please don't forget that these sessions are interactive. So if you have a question during the night, be sure to add it to the comments on our Facebook or YouTube stream. We'll endeavour to answer as many questions as possible. However, of course, due to time restrictions, we may not be able to get to all of them. So apologies in advance. So without further ado, let's dive into tonight's episode. This evening's topic is Exploring Quality Area 1, Educational Program and Practice. And we will be discussing the approved learning frameworks, the assessment and planning cycle, critical reflection, the role of the educational leader, and dive into strategies and ideas for conquering Quality Area 1. To be part of this discussion, we're lucky to have two very special guests with us tonight. Our first guest is someone that many FDCA members would have met at our recent national conference and our previous national engagement program forums. He's been a friend to both FDCA and the sector for many years now and has provided support and guidance in many different capacities over this time. In his current role as ACECQA, his title is Senior Manager, Priority Support, National Projects. Please welcome Perry Campbell. Thanks so much for joining us, Perry.
Thanks, Michael. It's good to be able to join you. Thank you.
Fantastic. So for those viewers who aren't familiar with you or your work, do you want to just share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do at ACECQA?
Yeah, no problem. So as Michael mentioned, my role is working as a senior manager in the national projects team at ACECQA. Typically, my role is the deputy national education leader, but at the moment I'm working on a project supporting regional and remote services, many of which sit outside the national quality framework, and that project is based on safety and supervision. But I do, working with these services, they're very unique contexts and stuff, but when I'm engaging with them, they very much remind me of family daycare. It's about the context of how education and care and quality education and care is really contextual. And I really think that family daycare epitomizes that kind of individual context of what is quality. So,
yeah, it's a really good point. And I think it's, in some cases, it's potentially overlooked, that sort of contextual aspect that we need to potentially apply to the lens in which we approach the different care types. Yeah. So thanks so much, Perry. As always, we appreciate your time and your support.
No, my pleasure.
I would also like to introduce our second guest, who's been sitting and waiting patiently. She's currently a member of the FDCA team in the role of Sector Liaison Coordinator, and was also, not so long ago, the Excellence in Family Daycare Awards 2021 National Coordinator of the Year. Please welcome Lyndall Cotterill.
Thank you.
Hey, Lyndall.
Hello. How's it going again?
Good to see you. Do you want to just give us a quick snapshot of a little bit about yourself and your history with family daycare?
Yeah, so I started out as a primary teacher, primary school teacher, and while I loved it, it wasn't until I had my own children where I realised the greatest impact was, that we can make on a child was in the first 5 years of their life. So I developed this passion and I immersed myself into how a child develops, play-based curriculums and that sort of thing. So I went off and studied my master's in early childhood, and then I got a job in long day care settings. I was then provided a job at a local family daycare service in Coffs, where I was the educational leader and coordinator for Mid Coast Family Daycare for close to 10 years. And then obviously I took out the 2021 Coordinator of the Year award and made my connections with Family Daycare Australia. And yeah, that's where I am now with being the sector liaison coordinator. And I get to enjoy my advocacy work for family daycare in this role, connecting with people across the whole sector.
And I have to say, we're very lucky to have you, Lyndall. I think it's really important, that our members, both services and educators, have the support from FDCA that come from a range of skill sets, but having that context of someone that's really lived and breathed being in the sector is really, really important for us. So it's great to have you. So again, thanks so much to you both for joining us tonight to discuss what is a topic that always generates a lot of discussion and so many questions, just spanning a huge variety of topics. So just before we start, I think for me, just to provide a little bit of context as to why we're focusing on Quality Area 1, Educational Program Practice. So it's clear that out of the 7 NQS quality areas, Quality Area 1, according to the assessment and ratings data, is the quality area that family daycare performs least well in overall. And it's the quality area with the largest discrepancy between the percentage of family daycare services rated meeting NQS or above when compared to all services nationally. So 70% of family daycare services meeting or exceeding NQS compared to 92% of all services nationally. So I think that provides, some appropriate context for why we need to dedicate some time and energy to this particular topic. And it's clearly, an area that needs our attention as a sector specifically. So having both been in roles that saw you heavily engaged in Quality Area 1, I thought I'd start by asking you both to explain in your own words why Quality Area 1 is important. And do you feel that there's any particular reason why family daycare, when compared to the other care types, doesn't perform as well in Quality Area 1? And Perry, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Michael. I think I do always, when we see those results come out in our snapshots and things like that, wonder that exact thing about where those kind of issues for family daycare are. And I think part of it for me, like that stuff around program practice and assessment and planning is so much of the work of the sector, and it's what drives the sector to being a professional sector. But yeah, I do wonder sometimes whether part of it is around the capacity of educators to have that confidence in themselves and be able to kind of talk to Quality Area 1. So it's not necessarily always, I think, that it's not happening. It's the capacity of educators to be able to explain and go into that. And one of the reasons that I think that often happens is because there's not that day-to-day working alongside a group of 2, 3, 10 people where you're having those ongoing conversations where it becomes a lot more natural. So it's around thinking about how do you generate those missed opportunities of having that ongoing dialogue with your professional colleagues around program practice, assessment and planning. So there's not that practice in having those professional dialogues with the person you're working next to and things like that. So yeah, so I think sometimes it is around being able to kind of explain it better and not feel like, it's unusual to be able to have those conversations on a day-to-day basis and things like that. So how do you kind of build that confidence?
That's it's a really good point, and I think it's one of those structural elements to family daycare that has a range of both benefits in some contexts, but also inherent limitations for others. Educators are inherently, within their day-to-day work environment, isolated, and that probably has a range of consequences. But I wonder, how do you actually take steps to ensure that that dialogue occurs. And I guess that's really, it's about networks, and it's about, I guess, the approved service and the coordinators actually actively facilitating those conversations.
And just
Lyndall,
opportunities like this. No, I was just going to say, and just opportunities like this to engage in that professional dialogue and have that be a part of those dialogues and stuff like that. Any opportunity to do it, I think it helps build that capacity to kind of, be able to talk about the work that you're doing and demonstrate how you are meeting that stuff in the those elements at least.
Yeah, I just saw it noticed in the comments there, Janelle Smith, 100% agree, Perry. We need connection with other educators and talk the talk. I mean, that's it's about connection really, and about facilitating those opportunities. Sorry, Lyndall, what are your thoughts on, given your background on that particular issue?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've sort of said the same thing, that like for a quality area on, for me, is about recording how far a child has come in their journey since they've started in care with an educator. So by setting that solid programming and promoting to families about what we do, it just raises our bar to showcase us as a professional as well in the field of education and care. But yeah, I guess Perry's right. The centre-based care, you have other people to bounce ideas off. You engage in that critical reflection often, and you have other educators to sort of engage with and ask, for new ideas in your programming. And I guess, family daycare educators are on their own. I think for assessors too, when they come in, they're doing three things. They're looking for observe, discuss, and cite. And the benefit of family daycare educators is that they have an environment that is so homely. They can see as soon as they walk in what quality care is going to be like in a family daycare setting. I think the thing that we fall down on as educators is, as you said, Perry, the confidence. We don't know what we can't talk the talk, like Janelle said. So often for myself, I would get a great educator picked for a spot check for A&R or something like that. And I'm like, yes, they've been picked. But then, you see it on them. They get asked, tell me about your cycle of planning, or what's your critical reflection? And the educator automatically crumbles and looks like a deer in headlights, because they don't know why they do what they do. So I think by getting more confident about knowing why they're doing things and how they're doing things and talking the talk, I think will raise the status of quality area 1 in our services.
Yeah, it's a good point. It seems, often when we think about some of the areas in which there's a discrepancy, like you said, Perry, in the different quality areas, there's often quite specific contextual reasons for that. And that's what, going back to your original comment about context, and, I think that's important, I guess, from an A&R perspective, that context is understood, as well as the issue of being able to facilitate and provide opportunities for those professional conversations and that connection, and fostering those relationships and key opportunities for conversation.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to say, Michael, I think sometimes it's that, is when are you letting somebody else determine the context of your quality programming and things like that, and just they're having a look and it's surface, what they can see is what they're thing, or are you providing that context? Are you letting them know that this is why we do this and this is the outcome we get, and things like that? So being able to tell whether it's your coordinator or a parent or an assessor is, this is the reason we do it, and these are the outcomes we get. Often we just want to talk about, this is our program, this is how we do it, this is our cycle. But just that, and I know I've mentioned it before in different Family Daycare Australia platforms and stuff, but just thinking about what's the next part of that story. That's telling people that what you do doesn't actually tell them why you do it. And so if you can think about, why do I do this and what are the outcomes for children, then it's hard for anybody not to see how maybe you are meeting. But if you're just telling them what you're doing, it doesn't always paint that picture about why you've done it and things like that. And then I think that ties into, when you're talking about the why, the critical reflection side of it comes out, and they can kind of go, oh, wow, you've really thought about this. I can see how you've kind of, this has progressed and that kind of thing over time. And suddenly you're ticking that critical reflection box as well, just by talking about how your program or planning goes, or your cycle and things like that.
Yeah, that's it's such a articulate and simple way that you put that, Barry. So, being able to, and perhaps sort of embedding those key concepts is maybe important for educators that might struggle to do that. Is, why am I doing this particular thing? What is it that am I doing, and what is the outcome that I'm seeking to achieve? If you break it down to that level of simplicity, then perhaps we might, those that might not be that confident in expressing it may be able to sort of push forward and gain a little bit of confidence by breaking it down into those really simple concepts. So just quickly before we move on to our next topic, something that we asked FDCA members about in the lead up to the episode was about how they felt about programming in terms of their level of comfort. And I think we can see here our scale, and that shows us on a scale of 1 to 5 self-rated confidence in terms of how comfortable educators are with programming. And you can see that the average is 3.2. So there's a bit of an even spread about those with comfortable and those that have caused stress and confusion for. So for those that are stressed out by the process of planning or are lacking confidence, what advice would you give? Lyndall, did you want to kick us off?
Yep. So I guess for me, I started by getting the educators to form a habit. So because I don't know, it's like telling me to go and drink water every day. I don't do it. I have to, internally tell myself or, prepare myself to go and drink water. So I guess it's looking at your days that you've got in care. If you know that you've got 2 babies and 2 toddlers on Tuesday and Wednesday, or Tuesday and Thursday, then you're going to rule them out. You're not going to get much documentation or programming done on those days. You're going to be, with the children in that instance. So, but then you might look at, Friday afternoons, you might know that some of those children might get picked up a little earlier. So that might be where you timetable that time to plan your intentional teaching for the week ahead, or what your environment might look like for the following week. So I guess you've got to make yourself accountable to get yourself organised and make little habits for yourself to get into doing the programming. And then I guess the next step is to start basic. So break the process down and view it as a journey for yourself as an educator too. You're not going to know everything about child development or play-based learning or EYLF outcomes, critical reflections overnight. But if you start setting goals for yourself and developing knowledge around those things that you want to look at, then that's what you're increasing your knowledge as well in that journey as yourself as an educator. So you need to be comfortable with that, and then after that you look at the observations. So for my educators, especially the new ones coming into care, into the sector, I sort of said to them, I want you to just find time to build goals for yourself, build goals for your children, and then work on the intentional teaching and the spontaneous moments. By just getting them into a habit of jotting that into their program, they could then change the environment to suit their ideas for their program, and then they could look at the observations. Because with the observations, I sort of wanted them to delve deeper. I want them to stand back and really watch what's observing. I want them to sort of have the knowledge of the EYLF outcomes by that stage, so that they can have those conversations about what they can see occurring. So I guess by scaffolding that and breaking the process down allows that educator to build confidence and confidence with the programming that they're doing. And I think the last thing is just taking time to build up the knowledge of the children in the care and to develop relationships with them, especially new educators starting the sector again, and for new children coming into care. When the children comes on board, I used to say to my educators, don't feel the pressure to be programming them for them straight up. Your program is your relationship initially. You're finding out who that child is, what provides relief for separation anxiety. So you might use that time to set up a mind map on the child that you have in care, just to jot down a few little pointers about them, because essentially you're building that relationship and that trust and that security with that child before you can go off and start planning for them. So yeah, at the end of the day, you want to know what each individual child's intrinsic motivation is, and going with that with your programming. So they were the tips that I used to give new educators.
Wow, that was really comprehensive. And I mean, there's so many points that I sort of took them down, but it's around, key takeout for me was around breaking down the process. And I guess, it's important for services, and you kept referring to new educators, to probably, understand that really, there's so much information to take in coming into the sector, and as a new educator, that actually having tools to actually break those complex processes down, like Perry said before, breaking it down into those two simple concepts can really help in terms of getting those less experienced educators to, be, better equipped to sort of have their own process in place. Perry, on confidence?
Yeah, I think Lyndall stole a few of my points there. But I think listening to it, that breakdown bit, like we tend to be generic and go the programming cycle or that kind of thing. But what is it that doesn't? And Lyndall talked about it. Is it the planning? Is it the tying it, thinking about the frameworks or theory and that kind of stuff? Because often it's not the implementation of the program and carrying out and that practice side of it. So where is the confidence not in that system? And go, all right, if I'm confident in this area, if I'm confident in the planning, but I'm not confident in how that ties in with something, like what makes you confident in one area is that you know it and you do it well and you get good results. So learn from the areas you're confident in. And I think part of it is trying to just internally change that dialogue, that it's not that I'm not confident with the programming cycle, it's that I'm not confident with this part of it. And just supporting yourself for your own kind of thinking, your own internal narrative, because if you're telling yourself that you're just not confident with the programming cycle, well, typically, no, that's not right, because you're confident in particular areas, but it's just one area. And it can be, again, it can be another little thing that you can't look at it and know overnight what it is. It takes some unpacking and some long-term stuff, but just trying to go through what part of programming, that programming cycle, where's my confidence not coming from? And then looking to go, why? Is it because I need more knowledge, I need more support, or I feel that English as a second language is a bit of a barrier for me, and that I'm not kind of, how do I kind of change that kind of thing? So just thinking, it almost becomes your own little action research kind of thing, which then again goes back to critical reflection. And that's the area that one of the areas we just talked about in quality area 1, where family daycare struggles with meeting that critical reflection element a bit. So I think they're all tied in together. And the better you kind of get at critical reflection, the result is going to be that you can better critically reflect and look for that kind of thing. But yeah, I would say to everybody, when you're thinking about your own confidence in that space, don't just lump it all into overall confidence. Like, celebrate those areas that you do well and you can kind of have your confidence in. Don't lose that confidence in other areas and kind of calibrate it down to that area that you're not confident with.
It's a great point, Barry. And some of those key areas you're talking about, sort of, you seem to be, implying that there's a role in saying, you mentioned there are some areas that you are confident in, and let's start there. So having approved services coordinators, actually building on those strengths and using that as a sort of framework to expand into the other areas. And again, some of those key points is really about questions, critical reflection questions, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. But there was another key point, and it reflected one of the comments from Mariam in the Facebook chat a little bit earlier, speaking specifically around the pressure of A&R for those that educators that have English as a second language, some of the other contributing factors in this regard. And I think that's a really important point. We actually, we just finished some work with the Department of Education that was looking into the cultural background of educators and how culturally diverse family daycare is, and it's immensely culturally diverse. And I think that that's an important point that we need to consider in terms of how we support educators to build confidence in these areas. So I'll probably move us along there, and we'll come back to critical reflection. But the second topic that we had for discussion tonight was in relation to the National Improved Learning Frameworks. As we're all aware, both frameworks have recently been updated, which actually makes obviously the timing of this conversation ideal. So I wanted to get you to have a conversation about the requirements under the frameworks for programming. What do we need to understand about the frameworks that'll assist in program development or execution? I mean, there's a lot in there, obviously, and we need to have a strong understanding about the approved learning frameworks. But I guess what in particular from the frameworks helps inform our thinking around programming? Barry, did you want to get us started?
No, I'm happy to.
Yep.
I think one of the key it's those principles and practice are kind of the foundation of the frameworks, and everything else in the frameworks is about unpacking and always ties back to them. So starting to think about those principles and practices are such an important foundation. And again, building confidence in that, everything else kind of connects to that and ties into that. And it is a framework. It's not a directive. It's about providing a framework and leading each individual educator down their own learning path around what that framework means to me. And one of the things I would really encourage everybody to do when they're particularly looking at the refreshed frameworks is they are now catching up in many cases with the sector. It's not all new stuff that everybody has to do. People will look at all this new stuff and go, I've been doing that for 10 years. Finally, the framework's caught up with my practice. So again, it's that strength-based lens, and we lose it sometimes, and we use it with children all the time, but we aren't generous with ourselves to use it on ourselves when we think about that strength-based stuff. But looking at those frameworks with the lens of, all right, I want to see what I'm already doing that is now in the frameworks that weren't before. And then the areas that are not is kind of going, yeah, this. And I've seen people spend lots of time and linking and letters and all this kind of thing, and it's down to the T and down to the page where it's tied to a framework. The framework doesn't ask for that. The National Quality Standard doesn't ask for that. Some people, that's how they work, and that supports them in their work. But just because it works for somebody doesn't mean it has to work for everybody. So it's about looking at the framework, focusing on those practice and principles and what they mean for you. And some of them you can never demonstrate in one program or one particular thing that you write. It's a holistic approach in many of the areas.
Yeah, I like what you're saying around it's a framework, it's not a directive. It's a fantastic comment. Around, and the frameworks are catching up with educators' practice. I'm sure that, even those great resources out there, in terms of sort of mapping the changes across like that, but it's a really good point. There's the development of the original EYLF was happening in, 2010 to 2012. So it's been, 10 years, like you said, since its development. So it really is catching up to current practice. Lyndall, was there anything you want to add?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, I used to get people to really look at the guide, because essentially the guide is broken into three parts: your program, your practice, and your assessment and planning. So essentially, for me, the requirements for programming is that you have a program that's in line with the EYLF and My Time, Our Place. Now, I know a lot of people forget about My Time, Our Place. So they have school-age children in care, and then, they just keep looking at the EYLF. So I guess as an educator, you just have that understanding of both those frameworks. You align your program with your knowledge of that, and you center that around your children, and you develop a curriculum. Now, there's another big word for people that they start freaking out about, but it just is the total learning experiences for the individual, your programming environment, everything that contributes to that child's outcome. So you are developing that knowledge to the your framework, and then that will maximize the potential for each child. Then you set up your practice, you're putting in your intentional teaching, and directing that learning around your practice for that program, and then you're doing your assessment and planning on it, and your critical reflection. So in that cycle of planning. So essentially, if you break it down into those 3 areas and you're doing that, and obviously you've got to give it, show progress to the families as well. If you're doing all those things, then you're meeting what you need to have met in this area. And I think for people, they over justify everything because they feel like they're not doing enough, and they keep asking more of themselves, and then they feel because they are doing too much and they don't know, like Perry said before, the why and the how of why they're doing it, and then they feel like they're burning out because they're just doing too much for trying to justify why they're doing what they're doing.
And Lyndall, I think it's that catch-22 situation where people aren't always confident in it. And the one way to deal with confidence is to try and do more than you, just to try and find that confidence. And so all your time then is taken doing more, but not actually thinking about the stuff that I'm doing. How can I talk to that to say that, you know what, this is enough because of this, this, and this. And I do this because for this reason, and this is how we reflect on the frameworks in my program. And even sometimes for different children, I'll do it differently, or that kind of thing, or how I use the My Time, Our Place, reflect that will be a bit different kind of thing. But if you can look at what you do and be confident in what you're doing and why, you don't have to try and do more to kind of build that confidence. Because no matter how much more you do, the only thing you're going to be confident about is that I've done this much. And quantity isn't always quality. So if your confidence is only because you've done so much, there's still not the quality into it kind of thing. And it's still not leading anywhere. And you're still not able to demonstrate what it's doing to support outcomes for children.
Yeah, there seems to be a sort of this theme emerging around this sort of, the advice that you're giving around breaking it down into those sort of parts. And, like Perry, what you said around, it's often those that aren't potentially confident, this can result in that overcompensation, which, results in doing too much and results in burning out, like you said, Lyndall. And if we, go back to what Lyndall said a little bit earlier about going back to the guide, and both of you said about sort of those key elements within there, program, practice, and the assessment and planning, those key foundations, principles and practice, then, we can probably assist those that aren't particularly confident to transition to, being a little more confident. Confidence seems to be a big sort of theme that's happening. So just want to show another slide. We asked our members to share their thoughts on who educators should be programming for. So just while we have a look at the results on the screen there, Lyndall, I'll ask, who should educators be programming for?
Yeah, well, I was actually really shocked. I mean, not shocked, obviously all the above, but with myself down there at 3%, for me, I don't know. I think I've always encouraged educators to be programming for themselves first and foremost, because educators would say, oh, I have me myself, because I was the education leader, can you read it? And I would, and they'd say, oh, we've been with other services and they never read it, and we're so proud that you've actually taken the time to read it. But I guess don't do it for the scheme. Don't do it for your coordinators. Don't do it for your parents, because that's the other one that they will say, oh, my parents never read it. Well, I don't know why I'm writing all this. Most often, everybody is too busy to read it in length. So I guess you're doing it for yourself to showcase you, the professional you are, the journey that you're on, as well as the journey that the children are on in your care. So, again, the strength of family daycare is that you have that home environment. Educators are so great at showcasing their environment and having this beautifully prepared environment. I think family daycare educators do that really well. The other thing that they do really well is the relationships that they've got with their children, and obviously with the families in care. You're opening your home and your house to people coming in. There's no hidden, secrets there. Everybody knows everything about yourself because they're coming into your home. So they're the things that we do really well. I guess now we just need to promote ourselves as more of a professional and getting away from being a babysitter, I guess, into being an educator and showcasing what you're doing really well in terms of, your programming. So I guess I was just a little shocked at myself being 3%.
Perry, your thoughts on who we should be programming for?
I've seen it as well. I wondered whether, if the question was who should you be primarily programming for, I think it would be a bit different, but it just goes to speak to where educators are feeling pulled in a million directions, trying to who they're doing it for. And there's often that space where it's almost like the program is the product that they're after. The program is just a means to capture how you're supporting children's development and progress. That's why you do it, not so you've got a program at the end of the day kind of thing. It's about thinking about it in that this is just a tool I use to support better outcomes for children and support their learning. And so shifting that focus from the program being the product to quality outcomes being being what you're after. Because if you're focusing your energy on the product is this written program that I've got to do every week, and everybody looks at it and how beautiful it is and how wonderful it is and all that kind of stuff, you forget that there's actually children in that as well and that kind of thing. And if you can recast your thinking to think about, this is just a tool that I use to demonstrate that kind of thing. So a lot of it is just about, if you're doing it for parents or if you're doing it for your coordinator and all that kind of thing, like, what benefit other than I've done it do they get out of it? Where the real value comes in how you use your program and the outcome and how that's supporting outcomes for children.
That's again, it's a really good insight. The program, you said the program is the tool. It shouldn't be the product. That's not the product that we're trying to achieve. It's not the outcome that we're seeking. It's a tool to obtain those outcomes that we're seeking for children. I think it's a fantastic way to think about it. I think, this sort of conversation, it does lead sort of neatly into our next topic, which was, I think we could probably devote a whole program, a whole episode to this. I'm talking about the assessment and planning cycle. So I want to ask you both a couple of specific questions that often come up regarding the assessment and planning cycle, observations and recording observations. A common question to me seems to be a quantification question. How many observations should an educator be making each week? Is there a minimum, correct, or ideal number? And how should those observations be recorded? Is there a right way? So, a few questions there, but Lyndall, do you want to jump in first on that one?
Yeah, look, there's nowhere that stipulates how many observations to do. And what it does say is that we're required to do a cyclic planning. So, as educational leader, when I didn't want to see, everything about the children, what they were doing in the week, what they ate, because, they thought, oh, I haven't done an observation on Johnny this week. I wanted, those things told me really nothing about the child. So I'd rather see, again, what Perry said before, quality observations being conducted that really go into depth about the child. And I guess the best type of observation is the one where, again, you stand back and you really observe. You observe who the child is, what they're doing, how they're engaging with others socially. You're really listening to those conversations that they're having with others, and you record that, because that, and again, it comes from your knowledge of the EYLF or the My Time, Our Place. You're going to use that knowledge that you have to help you write and educate yourself about what this child is doing in that observation. So, I guess the biggest light bulb moment, and even for myself as an education leader, I only just said this probably, in the months leading up to when I left, the biggest thing that I said to an educator, which was that light bulb moment, what can I write about this child that the parent might not already know? So, and one of the most loveliest things that I saw was called a love letter. It was written about a child. It was really authentic. It was from the heart, and it was like a letter to the parents detailing everything that the child knows about, the educator knows about that child. So it really showed the pure essence and the uniqueness of the child from their heart. So when the parent would read it, they'd say, wow, this educator knows my child. And they reflect on the little quirks that you might have in that letter. So, it was something like, little Johnny, he's the most divine little boy. He's currently hit his troublesome twos, but he's oozing out this energy to explore his environment. He's a natural born leader, an explorer of stuff, but then he's also a stubborn scientist, and he's curious. He loves mixing mud with water and spreads it all over his body. So for a parent to read this, they're really seeing, the pure essence of the child that is in the care. And then for the parents, they sit back and go, wow, we've just left our child in care with this educator who is really getting to know this, the product that I've read. So, be guided by the children, listen to them, stand back and really learn from them. That's, I guess, what I could say on that one.
Barry?
Yeah, again, back to your question around is there a number that we should be doing each week, or is there a correct or ideal number or a way to do it kind of thing? The short answer is no, and that's not an answer that's going to surprise anybody. But you really have to determine what's the right amount, and thinking about what you know about quality area 1, the requirements and the regulations. So many people, when they think about observations and programming and stuff, would never have even looked at regulation 73 or 74 kind of thing to go, actually, what is the requirement? What is that minimum requirement that the legislation says? But one of the most important things, I think, for it is around thinking about what you're doing and how you can demonstrate that the reason I do this is because it does this. Rather than somebody tell you that's not enough, tell somebody why it is enough, or why you do it that way, or why this numbers lead to this kind of thing. I've seen educators and chatted with them and stuff, and they'll write 20 observations a week. But then when you talk to them and go, oh, which ones of these observations did you actually use in the following, 10 of them, they never get to see the light of day again, because they're just to get the numbers up kind of thing. But if they started with just 10, whatever the number is, or whatever they want to set themselves, and some weeks it'll be a couple, some weeks it'll be lots. It depends what's happening and that kind of thing. And not every child's going to have the same. And even the legislation out, it says it's based on attendance patterns and things like that. But again, it's looking at what you're doing and what you're doing with it. But very much honing in on that kind of thing around, if you're looking and going, I'm getting some really great stuff here, and it's driving the picture that I get to paint of this child, and whether you use it in ways that, like Lyndall beautifully talked about, some educators are doing it and stuff. But it's all about those records that you're keeping on children are following their journey of learning. and being able to use that to continue that learning and inspire you as an educator to continue to provide environments that work. And this is kind of documenting that along the way. And how you do that is if you're looking and children are learning and they're growing and they're thriving in your care, then you've got to look at, all right, this is working. But if it's not happening and you kind of think, oh, it's stifled, maybe I just need to think about, how am I supporting this journey? Maybe it is my documentation or the way I'm using it or that kind of thing. Or am I writing 5 things about nothing? Or can I write one thing that's just so captures what I need it to do and is going to drive everything I do with that child over the next couple of weeks is going to be inspired by that one bit of thing that I heard, or that one discussion I had with that child, or that one thing I overheard them talking with somebody else, or playing on their own, doing this kind of thing. So it's really about how you're using it. But again, and I don't mean to keep harping back on it, but being able to say that why that number that you've chosen or that approach that you've taken is supporting those children in your care and your learning journey, in their learning journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like clearly, both of you saying it's not a question of quantification. It's about how meaningful it is. Like your example, Lyndall, the love letter example was an exceptionally meaningful example of an observation that was a sort of holistic observation, right? It wasn't necessarily around, Johnny did this, this, and this, and that, corresponds to element, 1 point, 2 point, whatever. I like, Perry, what you said, that it's about following that journey of learning. And if you think about it like that, then you can probably, you can see whether or not there is a journey of learning that's occurring. And if not, what we might need to change and go back to our programming that's going to lead to it. So it's about, the programming having, meaningful, the program being a tool to achieve a particular outcome, and the observation being a tool to help reflect on, our programming and that learning journey.
I think we get caught up in thinking that the planning cycle is one single thing, but often for educators, every child's in their own different cycle, and they don't all move in that same cycle and things like that. And I visualize them as being on kind of one big spoke, and there could be 8 different cycles on that same spoke, and they all move at a different time. But the family daycare educator is that spoke. They're the ones that are like moving that through, and some children will move through on a really smooth pattern and that kind of thing, whereas some will it'll take slow, or sometimes it'll move forward and back, and we don't want to get tied up that cycle has to be the same for everybody, and that if I'm going to do 10 observations for one child, I've got to do it for all of them.
Yeah.
But go, you know what, that one, I need a bit more of a picture on that, so I'm going to move. Children are at different parts of that cycle all the time. So it's really important to not just keep forcing that cycle of planning the same for everybody and just feeling like I've got to get to the next stage. I've got to get to the next stage. For some children, you move through that at a different pace than others, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be the same for everybody as well. Where you need to be able to do is talk about why it's different for each child, and that this is about each individual child. And if I'm programming for children, then each of their cycles has to be a bit different as well.
Good point. The contextual nature of the cycle needs to be, taking into account the differences, obviously, between the children and, like you said, Perry, the different speeds at which they potentially move through that cycle. We did have a couple of pre-submitted questions from members regarding specifically the assessment and planning cycle. So I just wanted to cover off those. So Sally, who's a coordinator from Victoria, asked, how can I motivate family daycare educators to engage meaningfully with the planning cycle?
I'm happy to jump in first there. I think to find out where the benefit is, often people just get into that pattern of doing it because they have to. And when you're doing something because you have to, you can never sustain it.
Mm.
But it's, again, thinking about these things we've got requirements in standards and laws, and they're based on laws and standards are based on usually really strong research that says these are important to support children's learning and development. But the focus for educators is around what benefit is this having? Again, not just going, the outcome is I can tick it and say it's done, I've done this, but thinking beyond that and going, actually, if I put the effort in here, the great thing is I can actually see the difference this is making in the children day to day, week to week, month to month. And I can reflect on at the end of the year and look and go, oh, wow, this child has had just such a great year of learning. And we celebrate that. But do we reflect on and go, how has my program and planning supported that? Can I see where that tie-in and that kind of thing? So I think it's just about finding the capacity to sustain it, is to be talking about the benefit of it and what it does, rather than just being, again, another outcome that it's, you're never going to sustain that if people are just working just to produce that product of a program or a cycle and things.
Lyndall, did you have anything to add on that?
Well, look, I guess I'm the same with Perry. For me, I see a lot of educators going, oh, I go with an emergent curriculum, I'm just going with the flow of the children's interests. And at the end of the day, like I think there's this myth about pre-planning and that it's not required and they're relying on the children's interests to go with the curriculum. And then for me, I feel sometimes that the educators are too busy planning around the experiences instead of the child, So, if they immerse themselves in that planning cycle, then they should be seeing that, I've got a child next week who I'm going to have more cuddles with. It's the first day of their week here. I've got to give them more cuddles because their separation anxiety might be massive. So if you're going to be cuddling that child more this week to help build their cup up, then what might you put out for the other children to be more independent, so that they don't need your attention? And also how are you going to help fill up your mental cup as well? Because, you've got children that might be all range of ages, amongst themselves in your environment. So I think, that's where you've got to immerse yourself in that cycle of planning, work out why you're doing what you're doing at each stage, how you're doing it, observations. And again, like Harry said, it might be per child. You don't have to see it as one big cycle for every child that you've got in care as a solid aspect. It could be, how am I doing the observations for this baby? How will I be doing the observations for a 3 to 5 year old child that I might have in my care? Now I've done that observation, how will I assess it? What am I going to do with this information that I've got? Program for it, implement your environment to make sure that you're accommodating to the baby and the 3 to 5 year old, and then evaluate it and go through that process. And again, like Perry said, it's could be individual for each child. It could be, across your service as well. So that's what I think. Yeah.
And I was just going to say, I think it can be challenging for coordinators and service providers and educational leaders and stuff, because having targets in that area is a good way to measure quickly how people are going. And so sometimes that pressure to have a certain number is not necessarily coming from necessarily the educator, but pressure being put from them outside, or they go somewhere and say, oh, they heard that you've got to do this many, or our unit wants us to do this many, and that kind of thing. So sometimes it's about more broader than just at an educator level, that those kind of things need to be discussed at that higher level as a service, collectively thinking about educators, coordinators, providers, and all that stuff working together. That sometimes just having those limits around, we need this done every week. In all honesty, that's about being able to measure really quickly how educators are going and try and support those that need it. But having those kind of expectations blanketed across every educator can sometimes is where you start to lose that confidence because you're not meeting that threshold that you're expecting, or it's taking a lot more work. And you talk to another educator and they're like, oh yeah, that's easy for me. And then you sit there and go, I can't believe, like, this is the most stressful thing, just trying to get to that minimum requirement that my service has set me. And then you want to know where confidence starts to get lost. It's when you talking to another educator who finds it easy to do, and you struggle with it. And so suddenly you start to feel like, yeah, I'm struggling with this, because you're comparing yourself, because there's a measurable. But the measurable should be, how is what you're doing supporting outcomes for children?
Yeah, I had another question there that I was going to touch on, but I think we sort of covered it off because it was in relation to the quantification question and giving some examples, some real life examples. So just noticing the time, might just move us forward to the next topic, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and we probably touched on throughout the discussion in a few different ways. And obviously that's about critical reflection. So obviously critical reflection can be defined in many different ways. In a recent resource developed by FDCA, it was described as an ongoing dynamic process of thinking honestly, deeply, and critically on a regular basis about all aspects of our practice as professional educators. It is a learned skill that helps you to think more purposefully and enriches your decision making. So obviously, critical reflection and what it means can be quite subjective. So I'd be just curious to get both of your perspectives on critical reflection, and specifically what it means to you and how we can critically reflect in the work that we do. Actually, just before we discuss this, I just wanted to share some examples of how our members are thinking about and conducting critical reflection. So you can see on the screen, there's a lot of different examples about how educators critically reflect. Perry, can I ask you, what does it mean to you, and how can we do it?
I think, that kind of work that you've done in that space, Michael, is beautiful, I think, because it's kind of captured that essence of what critical reflection is. And I think it's that stuff around thinking about perspectives, and it's not about evaluating an activity. That's not what critical reflection is. It's more holistic than that. And it's about trying to engage with diverse perspectives. And we kind of think about, when we talk about perspectives, it means we've got to go and ask 20 people what they think about what we've done. But it's not. It's just about considering them. And sometimes you do want to kind of get those perspectives, but considering perspectives doesn't mean you've got to go out and get them. You kind of know a lot about having it. And so you think about critical reflection a bit differently. And it's that kind of space where you need that opportunity to kind of reflect on what's happening. And when you are thinking about, how does my program work? What can I do differently? How does it benefit children? How does it benefit families? What expectations does my coordinator have on me, or my ed leader and stuff? And that whole kind of, then that starts to form that different perspectives. And so you kind of go, oh, all right, I'm going to change this particular part of it. And straight away, you've done some critical thinking. And as a result, you're changing practice, or it's informing future ways of practice. And we just look at that as, I just do that every day. Like, I think about that and do that kind of stuff, or check in and ask these kind of things. And it's always the way we get, the minute we put that word critical in it, people start to worry about it, and that it's more than what it is. I always, and I'm sure many of you heard me say it before, I tend to rather think of it as reflection that's critical, rather than critical reflection, because it just, when we hear the word critical in any other context, it's always a bad thing, or something bad's going to happen. And so then we try and turn it into a positive and say, oh, it's critical reflection, it's great, we should all be doing it. But every other thing that we hear, whether it's online, in the news, or whatever, the minute the word critical, it gets your attention, and something bad, you're about to find out something bad that's happened. But critical reflection is not like that. I know that some of the greatest things that I learn is when I just take that moment to just think about what I'm doing, how I've done it, feedback maybe I've got from somewhere else, or just, some of that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, actually. I've never really thought about it like that. That the word critical itself has so many negative connotations that it's daunting, a little bit off-putting just in itself. So reframing it to put the word reflection at the forefront, and reflection that's critical. I think that's it's a good way to sort of turn it on its head and make it less scary, I guess. Lyndall, your thoughts on?
Yeah, look, I don't know about you, but I find that my critical reflection comes when my head hits the pillow every night. So, then look, again, it's about finding that habit. If that is what happens with you as an educator, like my brain doesn't turn off. All the ideas come to my head and I'm like, oh, I should have done this today. So now I even ask Google, I'm like, Google, make a note for me. Because essentially, I don't always, it's dark. I don't have that notepad sitting next to me. So, critical reflection, or, you might be I go on my morning walk and all of a sudden I start thinking about other things as well. So critical reflection is when you get those moments where you are thinking deeper. And for me, again, it's just encouraging educators to make time to record that and document that, because essentially you're processing in your head, I should have done this differently, or that didn't work today, and so tomorrow I'm going to do this, and then you've done your critical reflection, but you forget that you need to then go and document that. So your phone is your greatest asset, I reckon, because I used to press voice record and then go, okay, critical reflection today was, so that all my ideas would come out, and then I'd go back to the educators and go, oh, you could have done this. But I also think, just again, making it basic for yourself. What was the highlight and why? What was the struggle and why? And then what are you going to change next week? If you've got that process of changing something, then that's your critical reflection. You would have your coordinator visits every time coming and talking to you. That was critical reflection. But again, many of you don't document that. So you might say, oh, I'm really concerned about this child, with the development and what strategies can I put in place. You might devise a whole range of different strategies for the week ahead for that child. And you've done your critical reflection with that coordinator. So again, next week you could go to your program and say, this is what from the conversation you've had with your coordinator, this is what you're going to be doing. And like you said, the Family Daycare Australia has a great critical reflection poster out there that I suggest everybody goes and has a look at. And, right now, I hope everybody's listening to today and they can go back and critically reflect what they've learned tonight.
Lyndall, that stuff you said around, we now are in a world where everything is technology based. And so we need to think about documentation isn't putting pen to paper anymore. There's so many broad ways to document, and that note to self function, whether it's on a phone, a laptop, whatever, what you can speak to in a minute or two or a couple of minutes at the end of the day or whatever captures so much more than if you were sitting in front trying to type up a whole day's worth of reflections and stuff like that. And then people think, oh, I've got to go back and type all those notes up and all that kind of stuff. No, why? Have a good record keeping system where you save your sound bites and put a title on it. And so if somebody wants to you can go, oh, here, look, here's 3 different things. I'll search the title and talk about reflection on sleep practices. Here's 3 sound bites I've got of that. Happy to let you listen to them if you'd like. These are my reflections. This is where I took it and this is where it come from and that kind of thing. And the other thing I think to just remember with critical reflection, it doesn't always have to result in change. But what it might do is reinforce great practice. And we've been doing this doing this many different ways, but we've been doing this particular way for quite a while. And we just want to reflect on it to see whether it's still meeting what it does. And so you do that critical reflection and go, actually, you know what? That's still working for us. And it doesn't always have to result in change. Typically, it does influence future practice or thinking, but you've got to be open to the fact that if you're looking at particular things and use it as a strength-based tool as well to see that the things that are working are still working the way you want them to.
And that's great, because I used to do that as a scheme level. We had in our program book, I had a different question every week just to promote deeper thinking. And I would ask hard questions like, would you play with you? And it's the conversations that you're delving deeper into. Oh, hang on, would I play with myself? Yeah, I'm really good at this and this and this, but no, I'm not very good at sharing or being respectful. I don't know. So it was just that delving deeper in, even as yourself as the educator. You've got to reflect on what your strengths are and your weaknesses and go with that as well. And I guess we've done the Mentimeters surveys for this with our program today, and I guess that's another tool for services to use as well, as to put forward questions to their educators to get a deeper sense of critical reflection in their service as well, about their knowledge about things and things like that. So use what's already out there with technology.
Yeah, that was two key points that came out of when you were speaking, Lyndall, and one of them was around, Google make a note for me. It was underline quickly using technology. The other one I liked was finding that habit. You got to find your own habit and what works for you. It's just sort of, for you, it's at night when your head hits the pillow, being conscious and probably reflecting on what works for me and what time's going to work for me. That's, really important, because you've got to make the time to do it. And Perry, it's a really key point. When you look at element 1.3.2 around critical reflection, it talks about critical reflection on children's learning and development, both as individuals and in groups, that drives program planning and implementation. But then, probably if you wrote it, you might add on the end that, but it doesn't have to generate change. You can utilize it to focus on the strengths of your practice.
Well, or keep driving what's working.
Yeah.
That's part, yeah.
So, I know we could, it's a topic that's really, really important. It's actually, when you go and look at the data, that's the ACECQA data, you can, critical reflection is one of the areas within quality area 1 that family daycare performs least well out of all of those elements. So I think it's a really important topic for us. For that, you mentioned the poster. It's a simple tool, but it was really about breaking it down into those component parts and having a really visual tool that educators could possibly engage with. It is a really important area, and it's an area in which we need to improve as a sector. So I'd love to spend a lot longer talking about it, but I know we've got to sort of move on. So another important topic that we need to sort of cover off while having discussion about quality area 1 is the role of the educational leader. So clearly, if we're talking about educational program and practice, the educational leader role is really important to consider. For me, I guess one of the important things to talk about in this, having this conversation, utilizing this opportunity, to talk about the role of the educational leader and how it differs in a family daycare setting in comparison to a centre-based setting. So can I ask and throw it open how the role can differ between the two care types, and also maybe what tips you both have for educational leaders specifically in family daycare?
I think Lyndall, hot off being an educational leader, is probably a good place to start.
Well, look, for me, as you as educators had children and you take delight in the children, it was the taking delight in the educators that I saw in my role. Like, it was those I did it moments, or that light bulb moment that, really I loved that, my role for that reason. There's so many different personalities in the educators that we get, same as with educators with their children. You've got all these different personalities. You've got with them all the different strengths and their weaknesses. So you have to embellish what they're really good at, and that comes from listening. I listened first and foremost. I would go in, drop my stuff off, and I'd be like, how's your day today? And I just wanted to listen to how they're going. Then I would say, okay, how's your programming and documentation going? What are your concerns? And then, I'd spend half an hour listening to their concerns that they had because they weren't confident in it. And then it was making sure that I embellished what they're already doing. I didn't want to change them, because then it makes it a chore and they won't do the programming cycle anymore. So I had to embellish what they already knew, and then obviously directed them by planting seeds, I used to say, of giving them the ownership of the task that I wanted them to do, but I'd plant the seeds so that I would eventually get my outcome in the end. So, again, it's through critical reflection that I would have those conversations, those quality conversations, to guide them to changing or adapting what they're doing, in their practice. So I think, in the essence, it was respect, trust, flexibility, compassion, and understanding. They were the things that I sort of drove my role, giving the ownership to the educators, listening to them, encouraging them to try new ideas and activities. If it was unsuccessful, I never used it, would make it an issue. Again, I used it as a critical reflection. How could we do things better next time? And refining the systems that they had in place. So with the personality type. And look, the personality type, sometimes I remember going into an educator's home and she wouldn't let me in the door. I thought, oh, here we go. Some people, if you don't have that trust and you don't have that relationship with them, you've got to pull that, or, they've come from another service where they're people have judged them. You've got to break down that wall before you can start working with that person. So that, for a successful relationship, and always, it was very strong, is Quality Area 7 is strong, Quality Area 1 is strong. So if you've got that strong relationship and that team partnership, then, that should be strengthening Quality Area 1 in the educator.
And Lyndall, the National Quality Standard tells us exactly that if 1 and 7 are so intrinsically linked together that if one's not doing well, typically the other won't do as well either. So the role that leadership and management have to work with Quality Area 1 as well. Mm-hmm. And that role of the educational leader, again, isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. There's some educators that thrive on having somebody come in with that fresh set of eyes and supporting them and being that resource and that challenger and doing all that kind of stuff, and where others will not work in that situation, and it's just a difficult place to be.
Yeah, really, really good point. I just wanted to, we had a question specifically around the topic of an educational leader, which came from Mariam, who's an educational leader in Victoria. And Mariam asked, what advice would you give to an educational leader of a large service in leading practice, fostering reflection, and supporting the assessment and planning cycle? It's a big question. And any practical strategies to transition to the updated learning frameworks effectively and smoothly. So probably two components there. What advice would you give to an educational leader of a large service in leading practice, fostering reflection, and supporting the assessment and planning cycle? Let's deal with that one first.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
Well, look, I had a service with 90 educators and I grew with the service. I think I started with about 15 and then we got to 90. And by the time I got to about 50, I had everybody doing several different million programs. They were doing Story Park and, Kinderloop, and I was like tearing my hair out. But I didn't want to have a one size fits all, because I didn't want to make it a chore for my educators. But in saying that, I developed a template or a programming book that it was just my expectation of a program. So I had the intentional teaching, spontaneous, an evaluation, a critical reflection question, and then a whole range of and goals at the front. I had a section where it says I continuously and consistently provide these experiences. So they would put all their routines around that page as well. So it was just a book that I knew that all my expectations were delivered in, and then they could go off and do their observations however they wanted to do them. I didn't make people do this. It was a book there on offer if they wanted it. And it just, if I had 85% of my educators using it and I had another, 15% using their own style of programming, it just made it easier for me to read, understand, and interpret what they're doing. So yeah, I suggest, going to Officeworks. It's, finding a template that works for you and your service, going to Officeworks, binding it as a book, and then, giving that to your educators, because essentially you want to make the job easier for you, but you don't want to change or control what the educators are doing, if that makes sense.
And I think when you are in that larger situation where you're trying to capture those reflections from educators that you're not in contact with each and every day and things like that, having that opportunity or setting that longer term goal of going, all right, how do we want to reflect, but why are we reflecting, and what's the best way to do it, but what are we going to do with those reflections? That we know we've got to do this, this, and this. It's a requirement. It's part of the standard. It's part of the framework. Whatever is driving you to want to do that, and that role as educational leader in supporting and leading that program and planning cycle, talk with your educators and come up with a way to go, all right, this is what we need to capture these reflections some way. What's the best way to do with it, to do it? And then what are we going to do with it once we've captured it? Because again, we don't want it to stop at just capturing those reflections or doing it that way. We've got to do something with it. So taking it back to that next step and going, all right, let's talk about why we've got to do it, how we're going to do it, but what we're going to do with it after that.
Yeah, really good points there, Perry. I think we had a live question coming through from Eastern Region Family Daycare. How do other educational leaders manage to document observations and programs for all children in care? Any thoughts on that from an educational leader perspective around they themselves? Sorry, Lyndall?
I said, does Perry want to start with that one?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I don't think there is a one way that others are doing it. Like each time I get the chance to spend time at a service, whether it's with educators or at a scheme or talking to ed leaders and stuff like that, the approach is always different. But it's about thinking about what does all children mean, and is there a time frame on that? And yeah, going in again with that mindset that for each child, for every day they're there, we're going to do one observation per month or per day that they're there. So if they're there for 5 days, it's 5 observations a month and all that kind of thing. Just trying to find that formula that can be applied, but to kind of think about it in that answer kind of thing is going, what is working for our service, not trying to see what others are doing. What you do get benefit from talking to other services about is how they got to that. If it's working for them, a lot of the lesson is not in how they're doing it, but the way that they got to doing it, the way that they are now doing it, that's working.
That's probably a good segue into, I'm conscious where it's over the planned allocated time. So before we go into Q&A session, I just wanted to ask, do you have any we've probably covered them off, but do you have any high-level final piece of advice that you would have for those watching on how they can conquer quality area 1, educational program practice, whether it be an educator, coordinator, educational leader, or any other role in the sector? Any high-level pieces of advice around how they can think about or approach quality area 1 as a whole?
I would maybe go back to our initial discussion, Michael, and go, don't think of it as a whole, think of it as elements. And when you look at the results for family daycare in quality area 1, we're only talking a couple of elements that family daycare are really kind of are not meeting. So don't get caught up in thinking family daycare doesn't do quality area 1 well. No, for the most part, but there are some areas that could be doing better. So breaking it down, is it program, is it practice, or is it assessment and planning? Like, where are the struggles for the educator, for the service, for the collective kind of thing, and taking it into that space. Again, where are we struggling? We're not struggling with quality area 1, we're struggling with parts of quality area 1.
Good point. That's a really good point. I think I probably should have reframed that question in terms of based on what we were saying about breaking it down into these key elements.
Yeah, and I just think if you just go with quality over quantity, I think, and then, don't justify why you're overdoing things, then I think we should get better results in quality area 1. And I think the crux of it as well is to develop a philosophy that's true to you, because essentially if you have a philosophy that is your backbone for your service as well, and really shows who you are as an educator, essentially that too can help in quality area 1.
Good advice. So that sort of brings us to the end of what we'd call the official content for the evening. We move on to our question and answer session, again, being conscious of the time. As I mentioned at the start of tonight's session, it's not possible potentially to get to everyone's questions. And just want to thank everyone that submitted questions before tonight's session, and those that have been posting in the comment section on the stream. We really appreciate that, and that's the opportunity to use the platform that we have to generate this conversation, make it more rich, and include your voice. So, Liz, we had a pre-submitted question. Liz, a coordinator from New South Wales. Not everything I plan for children goes on my display program. For example, settle 8-month-old down into care. I would not put that on my display program, along with the many things I do naturally in these circumstances for this child in relation to outcome 1. How do I make the 5 steps in element 1.3.1 visible to the 110 practices per day that are not on my display program? If it's not on the program, has the cycle been broken? Thoughts, Lyndall?
I think you've just got to be selective in what you document, because it's not possible to document or capture all the rich experiences and learning that occur throughout the day. So many times your routines will become pieces to write in your reflections. Like if you've got a child that hates nappy time, and they scream blue murder, what might you put, above them to help that situation, and it is bold trial and error. So I think at the end of the day, it's a quality over quantity aspect, and you just can't obviously document everything in every day in your programs.
And the quick answer to that would be, if it's not being documented, all those 110 practices, has the cycle been broken? No. In short, I'd say no. It's around if there's particular things in those practices that you're trying to follow up and do and you kind of want to do some more with, and that kind of thing, and you're capturing those, then but trying to, I would hate to see how big that cycle would have to be to try and capture all those practices every day for each child kind of thing. It's just, it's that space where it's finding what information you need to capture and doing the best with it, and capturing information that's going to be useful. And if something's happening in one of those 110 practices a day that is going to be useful for you to capture and kind of start to paint that picture, then it is useful. But if capturing it isn't providing any use or isn't leading to any better education and care for that children or better learning outcomes, then it doesn't need to be captured, but it's not breaking that cycle either.
And again, conscious of the time, just one final question that we had come through, and just a high-level thoughts on this one. How can we make life easier regarding QA1 while staying compliant? This came from Manjinder, who's an educator in Western Australia. So how can we make our life easier regarding QA1 while staying compliant? Thoughts? Making life easier in relation to understanding or executing Quality Area 1? Sorry, Lyndall.
I guess we've sort of covered it in everything that we've sort of said tonight. Finding something that works for you, finding, making it not a chore, not overdoing it, keeping it basic, getting confidence in it. I think they're all the things that, people need to do to make life easier for themselves.
And for me, Michael, I think you touched on it earlier when we started, is around, there's a reason we have Quality Area 1. Like, go back to the reason we have it and find that connection with the reason for Quality Area 1, and not let the words on the page, you become a slave to them. The reason we have Quality Area 1 is really important. So go back and connect with the reason for it, and have a look in the guide to the NQF, the lead-in stuff around there for Quality Area 1. Like, if you really want to connect to the reason for Quality Area 1, have a deep dive into that and just reignite that kind of connection with the reason we have it. And from that, there should be a drive then to want to kind of work in that Quality Area 1 space.
Good advice. Find something that works for you and go back. There is a reason for QA1. And I think the reason falls back to those key elements that we've covered across the night. The foundational standards within Quality Area 1: program, practice, assessment and planning. Then look at the words that attach to those, the standards. Program, the educational program enhances the child's learning and development. Practice, educators facilitate and extend each child's learning and development. And assessment and planning, educators and coordinators take a planned and reflective approach to implementing the program for each child. It's really good advice. Find something that works and go back to the fact that there's a reason for Quality Area 1. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Sorry, apologies, we went a fair bit over time. I want to say a huge thank you to Perry and Lyndall for giving up their time to join us tonight. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been a really rich and valuable discussion, so we really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and I appreciate the effort that everybody made to get here as well. I know for many of you, you've had big days and probably just closed the front door and jumped straight online, so really appreciate that, and that makes the effort to join worth it on its own.
I've no doubt, the audience tonight and members watching in the future will take some great insights after the rich discussion that we've had. Thank you, as Perry said, to everyone in the audience for joining us tonight, and thanks to everyone that sent in questions again. Don't forget that if you want to go back and view tonight's episode again, it'll be available on the FDCA website. The next episode of the FDCA online engagement series, titled Wellbeing in Family Daycare, will take place on Thursday, the 27th of April at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be joined by Maria Heenan from BU, 2021 Coordinator of the Year National Finalist Mariam Shahid from Bright Sun Family Daycare in Victoria, and 2022 Educator of the Year National Finalist from Adventure Patch Family Daycare in Tasmania, Sue Higgs. So thank you all again. Thank you, Perry, so much. Until then, have a great night, and we look forward to seeing you all again in April. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.